Hello and welcome to the Vicars Watch Dibley,
the podcast where three priests link our stories with those of a Reverend Geraldine Granger and other TV vicars. I'm Kate.
I'm Jenny.
And I'm Ruthie. This episode we're talking about the Easter special episode, the Easter Bunny. In this episode we're going to talk a bit about Lent, about death, about funerals, but also about chocolates. And perfect for all of our talking today about death, Kate has got a rainstorm going on in the background, so this is going to be some interesting audio.
Well, hello. It's lovely to see you both. How are you?
I've been better, but how about you guys? I'll get on to me in a moment. How have you been, Kate?
I've been better. It's been a really bad fatigue week, but that's how it goes. But no, starting to get back kind of into the swing of things, recovering after my really nasty cold. Yeah, that's good. How are you doing, Jenny?
I feel a bit guilty because I was on holiday last week, so I feel positively refreshed. However, very windswept today. Nearly got blown in and out of everywhere I've been to so far, so...
Yeah.
You should not feel guilty for being on holiday, Jen.
No, I just meant because you've both had you're both like, oh, I've had a really bad cold, or it's not a great week, and I'm here like, I went on holiday and now I feel great.
I'm sure that it will be a turned around at some point.
Yeah,
true.
We'll come for you.
Yeah, so true. Oh, it will indeed. Yeah.
So there have been some really good things that have happened this week. We have got an ordinand staying with us at the moment. So an ordinand is a person who's training to be a vicar, which is really great, and he's here for Holy Week and all that's happening in the run-up to Easter. And what's really nice is that Fern, who is staying with us, Toby's known him for about 10 years or something. So yeah, it's been a long time and seen this journey that he's gone on, so that's really good. Yeah, it's great fun. But my son can't say the name Fern, so he's been calling him Bollo for some reason, which makes no sense.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so that's been a good thing. But actually, the thing that's kind of taken over this week, and this is I'm a vicar, and I really struggle with depression and anxiety at times in life, and have been up and down and on medication for various different parts of my life for about 10 years now, and it's deciding to kick my bum this week. So poor Jenny and Kate have got me in my gym jams because being upright was how I managed today. But we're getting there. But yeah, you just have to do the things that help to keep going, and it doesn't always happen as easily as that. But one of the things that has been really helping is you lovely listeners, because we've received a load of messages from people recently, and it's been really, really nice. So we've had people from California and Australia message just to say that they're enjoying what we're doing. And we had someone message who was thinking about getting ordained or becoming a priest, which was really, really exciting. And so hopefully people are finding us vaguely interesting, and it's not just our mums listening.
Yeah, but and we did something a bit different last episode, so if anyone wants to give us feedback on that, that would be good. Very good. But speaking of last episode, we made some serious boo-boos, didn't we, Kate? Yes, we've got a few confessionals to bring today. So we're going to enter now into the confessional booth. All of us.
All three of
us. We all
us
did badly.
Collectively. Who would like to start?
Well, I think it was a combination of me and Jenny who mixed up Sean Bean and Liam Neeson, who are very different actors. It was Liam Neeson in the episode of Revd.
I apologise.
And then we went on to talk on about Sean Bean, so we couldn't edit it so we didn't sound like complete fools. But we do know the difference between Liam Neeson and Sean Bean, and they are both marvellous actors, so we apologise to them both, who are quite clearly listening to this.
Obviously. I'm sure it's their jam.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Jenny, you made a boob, didn't you, with your comedians?
I did. This is a reminder. Always do your homework. Always do your research. Yeah, I said it was, I quoted a comedian looking at the Genesis story, and I said it was Billy Connolly. It absolutely was not. I went and refound it again and tagged you both in it so you could have a look. It was Ricky Gervais. So very sorry about that. Not even close, really. So please accept my confession. Please absolve me, dear friends and listeners.
Yeah.
And I also have a confession. I talked about funny parts of the Bible, and I talked about the Book of Common Prayer translations, and I talked about unicorns in the Bible. And I've been instructed by Toby, who does our editing, and decided to do a bit more research into this, that yes, in the Book of Common Prayer, Psalm 92 does talk about unicorns, and this is also in the King James Version, but it is a mistranslation, and it should be oxen.
Ah.
I mean, that's a proper, nerdy, actually, I think you'll find in the original, it's mistranslated, so... Yeah, yes. We did bad. We're sorry.
Yeah.
Please
forgive us. Yeah. Whoops.
Fantastic. Well, shall we press on with what we're looking at today then? On trend for the current season, we're going to be looking at an Easter episode. We've fast forwarded season 1 a few episodes to arrive here. We're looking at the Easter Bunny episode, the Easter special for 1996. Unmissable, really.
Yeah, as this episode is coming out on Good Friday, so we thought we'll just mix it up a bit and make it relevant. So I have our text. It has the Easter Bunny incident. It's not the Easter Bunny incident, that's the Christmas one.
It's just called the Easter Bunny.
The Easter Bunny episode is in here, and so we can go through it and talk about the episode. And we start off in the vicarage, in Geraldine's living room. Alice is watering silk flowers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And we get on to the topic of the Easter Bunny, of which Alice is a firm believer.
She is a firm believer. And Jerry is, I think, trying to write her sermon at the desk. Yeah. And she's clearly not wanting to engage with Alice at all. So she's very dismissive of Alice's claims about the Easter Bunny, but Alice just, she digs her feet in. And,
completely.
She quotes the local legend, whoever questions the rabbit but once, their firstborn shall be a dunce.
Yeah, so Dibley Village, if you've not seen this episode for a while, has the Easter Bunny, the Dibley Bunny, who comes and visits, and Alice is very firm that this bunny exists and she's seen him, and Geraldine is not a believer at all, although after hearing the dunce rhyme and finding out that Alice's mum questioned the bunny, she's a bit more closer to believing. But the whole conversation is started by Alice asking about, do you believe in magic? And Jerry talks about Paul Daniels and his significant impact on the magic world. But then it kind of goes on to talking about magic and miracles, and just wondered what you guys thought about, how the two seem to cross over, but they don't cross over, but people think they're the same. Have you ever had that conversation with someone previously?
Yeah, so Jerry describes it as the magical manipulation of things by the Lord God. Are miracles magic? Magic, if we're talking in the kind of Gandalf magic, swords and sorcery sense, is an unnatural manipulation of our surroundings to create outcomes which I guess you could say are miraculous. So conjuring fire or water or parting the way through a difficult area or whatever. And in a way, you could apply that same description to the miracles that we see of God in the Bible.
Yeah, there's a dangerous line, isn't there? Because there's it's when it's a trick, then that's because there's in the Bible there's talk of Simon the magician, isn't there? In Acts somewhere, and it's very much like, no, this guy is messing with stuff that's not good, and so there's a distance from that, but at the same time, yeah, if we're talking about Gandalf.
I was just going to say on that as well, at the moment morning prayer seems to be looking at Moses and the different plagues that God sends, and sometimes it says, you know, Moses did this particular act but then the magicians did it as well, and it's like, oh wow, that does make things muddy.
I think the distinction comes in the source of power, or in the Bible, and the biblical understanding of magic versus miracle. Magicians are limited because their power is coming from, like, the Baals, right? And the Baals are spiritual beings that aren't God.
Yeah.
I think is the best way to summarise them. Whether you want to attribute that as demons or not, or rival deities, we're not going to get into that. But the understanding is that none of these spiritual powers are as powerful as God. God is the ultimate power in the universe, as the biblical narrative tells it. So the framing is that magicians can get their power from these other spiritual sources, but they will never be able to achieve what God can achieve. So when you have the competitions between magicians and agents of God, they tend to eventually reach a limit. You have levels of, well, we can do this and you can also do this. But eventually a limit is reached where the magicians cannot achieve what God is achieving. So a miracle is something so beyond the expectations of the natural order of the world that nothing except God can achieve it. But then I feel you have small miracles in your life where maybe it's godly coincidences and things just line up. That's a more practical lived experience.
It's a big topic, isn't it, to kick off our podcast with? You think, we're going to talk about the Easter Bunny and then magic versus miracles. And were you ever banned or church youth groups suggested you didn't watch certain things because of it having magic in or anything like that?
No, nothing for me.
Yeah, so growing up, I was really into sci-fi and fantasy. I still am. And because some members of my extended family didn't really agree with that, I had to keep it on the down low about having interest in those books.
It's a funny old thing, isn't it?
I think my mum would have been like, you're reading? Oh my gosh, read more!
My mum literally tried to do an intervention because she thought I was reading too much.
Oh, that's so sweet.
When I was about 12 years old, maybe.
Oh. The only thing I was doing too much of at 12 years old was watching The Lion King. I used to watch it back to back to back to back. So my mum had to confiscate the videotape. Yes, that's right, the videotape. Because it even came to the point where I'd eat my banana like I had lion paws and like it was a piece of raw meat. I just couldn't get over it. But I'd cry at the same parts every single time. Yeah. I think I was addicted. Probably some sort of childhood trauma or something, I don't know. But
my mum keeps going on about how obsessed I was with The Little Mermaid.
Really?
She keeps bringing it up how apparently I used to watch Little Mermaid back to back.
Maybe
it scared me.
It must be that maybe each of us has our particular story that once we connect with, that's that's our Disney. We're wedded to it within our soul. Maybe that's a bit crazy. Sorry.
Maybe.
I've got.
What would yours be, Ruthie?
Tattooed on me.
Yeah, Beauty and the Beast. You are such a Beauty and the Beast. Yes.
And it still is. I talked earlier about depression. Actually, one of my happy places to go to is just to watch a Disney or Pixar movie because it takes limited energy and it's familiar stories and it's just like a warm blanket sometimes.
Oh man. So good.
I mean, could we do an analysis of why each movie is our favourite and what that means about us as people. I'm sure we could, but that's going to take up a lot more time.
We're going to have a Disney episode.
It would turn into a sermon, I think, for me. But yeah, I'd love that.
So on from all of that, Geraldine does a slightly interesting thing, doesn't she?
Yes. So I had a couple of moments in this episode where I said, whoa, and had to pause the episode and just process. So we're going to get into this. My experience...
Get ready, strap in.
My experience of this episode seems to have been slightly different to you, Ruthie and Jenny. Maybe it was the mood I was watching in, but when we were doing our brief chat about what we were going to talk about today, you were both talking about the emotions that we're going to get to later in the episode, and I really latched onto something that was just really... I couldn't get over when I was watching this episode, is there's a tonal shift with Geraldine in this episode where she comes across not as fun, light-hearted, kind teasing, but actually cruel. And this, in this opening scene, is the first instance we have it where she is genuinely quite cruel and serious about it with Alice, where she threatens to spank Alice's bare bottom with a hairbrush for lying about seeing the Easter Bunny, which either it's really kinky or I mean, what is happening here with this dynamic? Usually she's really affectionate towards Alice and she'll go along with Alice's naivety and she clearly finds it funny, but she's affectionate and kind to Alice about it. But here it's like something in Geraldine has snapped, maybe because she's worrying about a sermon she's trying to write and she just doesn't have any patience for Alice. But she's cruel, and then this cruelty continues throughout. We'll talk about the parish council in a moment, but I paused it at 7 minutes 11 because when we're talking about things to give up for Lent, Geraldine is actually cruel to everyone in the room and making some really sharp digs at other people, and the faces she's pulling, gurning at the camera and looking like she doesn't want to be there, and wielding her crunchy bar. And I don't know, I just felt like throughout this episode it felt like Geraldine just wasn't herself, and like she was being cruel and didn't have patience for people, and is actually something, and we'll get back to this at the end of the episode, but I thought that would have been a really interesting theme to explore from a ministry perspective, because that's actually a very real thing.
Yeah, I did notice that actually, now that you mention it, that Geraldine seems a bit meaner in this, and it's not as subtle, her kind of remarks. And so, yeah, I wonder if she's just having a bit of an off week or something like that. But yeah, I did, especially when talking about the things to give up for Lent. It was quite pointed. But Jenny, you're looking, well, actually, with your camera, you're looking quite ghost-like. But
sorry, it's the
you're
sunshine.
Looking like that you disagree. Yeah, but
I don't know. I did get what you mean about the hairbrush chat with Alice, and actually, instead of finding it cruel, I found it quite patronising. Like, Alice was trying to stand up for herself, and I was like, "Oh, Geraldine, come on!" But I didn't pick up in the parish council meeting about. I just missed it. I think Geraldine has done so much. She's such a hero in my eyes. I can't see anything bad.
Oh, yeah. It is. But is that something that would we joke about that with each other?
No way.
Would you not joke about spanking me with a hairbrush? That's my point.
Maybe I would, but I think it's difficult. But I think for the sake of the TV series, she says what we're all thinking. Like, we all know that Jim dithers, we all know that Owen swears. But I sort of got it as, I don't know, more friends and friendly banter rather than cruel digs. But I'm going to have to rewatch it with that sort of hat on and see if it comes across differently.
with your cruel hat on.
My cruel hat.
I just felt like when I was watching the episode, I had this moment where I felt it feels like this has been written as a very kind of self-aware dig at each of these characters by the writers. Like, normally, yes, we're all aware, and Geraldine's aware, and they're all kind of laughing and poking fun together at Jim dithers, Frank is pedantic, Mrs. Cropley is adventurous in her cooking, Owen swears and has an odd relationship with his farm animals, etc., etc.
That's putting it mildly.
But here, it was just named so directly and so counterintuitive to what I expect from a Vicar of Dibley, where in a Vicar of Dibley, normally you see people are frustrated with each other, but they rub along nicely and they genuinely like each other beyond the frustrations they have about their personality quirks. Whereas here, it's so targeted for comments that, I don't know, I just felt almost like it hadn't been written by the same people, even though it had. Or maybe because I read fan fiction, it felt like it was written like a fanfic of someone who's trying to write the characters as they know them, but not with any of the subtlety and nuance that the original work might have.
We should say, just as a reminder for what's going on in this episode at this point, is that they're having a parish council meeting, and it's the start of Lent, and they're talking about what to give up as part of that. And Geraldine says quite pointedly to various different characters what to give up. So Owen gets told to give up swearing. He's like, I don't bloody swear. Would you say bloody's a swear word?
Tough. I personally would say no, but I know many others would disagree and say yes.
As someone residing in Yorkshire, I believe bloody's just a part of general speak. But yeah,
I have to say, I hear your heart's cry, Caitlin, about this this part of it, as one of our lovely tutors would have said. Hear my heart cry. I do see what you mean, and I am going to rewatch it and have a think. But something that really came out of this scene for me, which I loved, was that, although it perhaps wasn't done in the right way, they're all giving up something together for Lent, and they're doing it together. Someone made the comment to me last week because we are in Lent at the moment, it's really hard when everyone gives up something different and they don't talk about it. And this person compared it a little bit to Ramadan and how Muslims fast all together and then they break their fast altogether. And that everybody knows what they're going through, and they can cheer each other on and, encourage and pray for one another. And I just thought, actually, isn't that great? And I thought maybe there is a better way for Christians to do Lent that looks something like this, to sort of either do the same thing all together or to, at PCC or parish council or, even your warden's meeting or standing committee, like whatever sort of communities you're a part of, to say, right, what are we all going to give up this week and how can we encourage one another as we do it? Because it is hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I like that. I think that's a really good idea of doing it together as a community and supporting. It's tricky if you see Lent as a giving up a bad thing that you do, then that's tricky to do in community.
Yeah,
you're working out what you do. But actually, if you see it as a, taking up a discipline or doing something together, then that's a much easier thing to do. I hadn't thought of it in the same way as Ramadan. That's really
the other thing. Well, I thought that as well from the person that commented, but I also thought that how good an idea it is to have Lent fines, because I'd have eaten so much more chocolate guilt-free in Lent if only I had a Lent fines. But I'd happily pay £1 to have a chocolate bar every now and then through Lent. Oh well, never mind.
The idea of Lent fines makes me feel complicated emotions, because on one hand I get what you're saying, it's an idea of accountability, but also it's in a way a fun way to do fundraising. Like you can say, oh, I'm gonna eat my chocolate bar whatever so I can pay a fine, or oh no, I've sworn, so let's put £1 in a box, and at least something good and tangible comes out of Lent, because Lenten disciplines, you tend to break them, right? It's really difficult.
Yeah, I've definitely messed up with mine.
I have completely abandoned mine, I think, just because I'm lacking all creative energy at the moment. But
yeah,
I've actually been just about okay.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say that, sorry.
Good
job.
Well
Thank
done.
you. Thank you, everybody.
But at the same time, for me, so we talked about what they're doing for Lent is each of them is giving up a vice or a weakness or something. And in a way, they are bettering themselves during Lent, but in another way, they are getting at each other. It's a very odd dynamic. But is Lent just about giving up vices? I mean, the three of us are doing different things for Lent. We've taken things up, or we're trying to adopt new habits or new mindsets. I don't know. Is Lent about giving up vices? Is it just about giving up vices? I always thought Lent was about getting closer to God, and trying to give up a vice or something which you rely on too much can be part of that.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
That's obviously not something which is touched on in this episode.
It is more the practical outworking, isn't it, rather than the spiritual treasures that are the reason why. But yeah, no, I think I do definitely agree. It's funny the vices they came up with. I think one of the things that surprised us perhaps was coffee being called the vice of Satan.
So this is then, we've moved on into vicarage. We're kind of cramming a lot of this together because a lot of what we want to talk about is the same stuff in these scenes. But so yeah, this is in a vicarage where Hugo has come to Geraldine because he thinks he's too boring and doesn't have anything.
It kind of is.
Because no one talked to him. He was just quietly pulling the thread in his jumper during the scene where everyone's being pointedly targeted for giving something up, and he's felt left out, and so he's come to talk about his insecurity about not having much of a personality.
And bless him, suggests drinking coffee so that he can give it up next year. So sweet.
Which Geraldine agrees is the brew of Satan.
Yeah, coffee is the work of Satan. Yeah. Team tea all the way.
No way. Coffee for life.
Coffee when necessary, except it gives me major anxiety.
Oh.
It's my heart going too fast like a little rabbit.
I have to say, before we do move on to talk about Hugo and what he did decide to give up, because I think that's quite juicy, obviously Geraldine is almost forced, she's coerced to give up chocolate because she's eating a crunchie, she's got a massive slab of dairy milk in her file, and then there's something else that she's got. They open up a Bible, don't they? And in the Bible, there's a cut-out section for chocolate, yeah? Well, when I got ordained, back in the grand old day of 2016, two of my very beloved friends bought me, no kidding here, a Bible with a cut-out section for chocolate. Isn't that brilliant? It was like the perfect Vicar of Dibley ordination gift. So coming back to what we were saying just a moment ago then, obviously Geraldine's given up chocolate. I was talking about my woes of giving up chocolate. But Hugo comes to the vicarage and he talks about what he wants to give up, and he calls it, a little bit mysteriously, It. I've been thinking a lot about it, he says. I think I might give up it. Which Geraldine doesn't get instantly, and I love that. And I was thinking, I haven't necessarily unpacked Hugo as a sexual being at this point. I don't feel like we've seen him as a... That sounds a bit strange, doesn't it? Sorry. What I mean is that I'm like, oh, right, because I just sort of see Hugo as like a... I don't know, we get some flirtations, don't we, with Alice? But exactly, yeah. Becomes a bit more real at this point.
But then we have this song he sung in Window and the Weather about holding himself.
When it's cold and still.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, you don't really think of Hugo as a sexual being. He just... You've got the kind of flirtation going on with Alice, but it feels a bit more like a primary school crush or something like
it does.
That,
it feels childish. Thinking, yeah.
I would like to get naked with this lady.
Yeah. Which the next scene actually, like the next part of the scene, actually reveals is not as innocent on Hugo's side as on Alice's side.
Yeah.
So
Very interesting.
Jerry and Hugo agree that he will put £1 in the Lent fine box every time he thinks of it.
can we just say for the record, it is sex.
Yes, it is sex.
Yes.
Or at least it is heavily indicated that it is sex, or at the very least thinking about naked ladies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
not the bare naked ladies, as in the band.
Yes, indeed.
But bare naked ladies.
Yes.
As in naked women.
Yes, ladies who are naked. Specifically Alice, apparently, according to the next scene. But also throughout the episode, according to various films that they've been watching. So Geraldine and Hugo agree that he will put £1 into the Lent Finds box every time he thinks about sex or something sexual. Enter Alice with a tray of tea and some snacks and some fantastic double entendres. Double entendres? Double entendres. Double entendres. I know how you like it, Hugo. Hot and strong. Nice and wet. I've got a donut for you. Some chocolate fingers. I just love sticking them in my mouth.
Sucking the chocolate off.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I love it when because it progressively gets worse and worse for Hugo. Bless him, he's putting £1 in the box even when Alice just walks in with a tray of tea, let alone when she's manoeuvring the chocolate finger in between her lips.
And he's doing his best not to make eye contact.
Yeah, he's trying to look away. And then he's like, Vic, I haven't got any cash on me now. I'll have to put £5 in the box next week.
I'll stop you. But one of the things, like, going back a little bit, is I like Geraldine's response of the fact that he's thinking about sex isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
Because I think that's definitely how I've grown up in church, in a more kind of conservative setup, that sex was this kind of forbidden topic that you kind of talked about, but in the, keep it into your pants till you're married kind of thing, and don't think about doing anything beforehand, and then when you're married, have a great time. But it's not kind of like explained at all, and it's something that I think the church is still not great at talking about, is it, because we call it. We can't say, sex and arousal and attraction and all this different kind of stuff, which is part of us as beings, created by God. Actually, that's part of who we are, and we need to be better at exploring it.
Yeah, and I think it's something which is really hard.
Which is a double entendre.
Oh, it's something which is really hard. It's something which I think, because we might have grown up in more conservative settings, or as teenagers, I was part of a slightly more conservative group of friends. And I think when we were teenagers in the early 2000s, the purity movement was still quite influential in more evangelical circles. And I still carry not necessarily a fear, but I find it really difficult to talk about sex in a church context as an authority figure. I'll talk to individuals, friends, just other people in parish who I feel like I can be open with. But I'm very careful what I say about sex, about relationships, particularly as a single young woman, because I don't know, I think because having been exposed to such a very strong and strict line of teaching and mindset, it's very easy to worry about, if I say X, will I suddenly be kind of attacked on Twitter or whatever for being for being horrible and a heretic or whatever, and for spreading the word of Satan. It's really difficult.
Did you do the Christian side hug?
Yeah, the Christian side hug.
Where you couldn't hug kind of full on, because goodness me, you might accidentally brush against things and shivers. But a side hug that covers all bases, so long as you don't have a cheeky bum squeeze on the way down.
But then at like big Christian youth gatherings like Soul Survivor, like the free hugs thing, where people would run around giving out free hugs. It's just free hugs. It's not because we want to touch someone who we might fancy. It's just free hugs and we're being friendly. Although I remember there was this one year who I went as a leader with a youth group, and they had to make an announcement, like telling off there were some young ladies who'd been going around hugging and groping some of the lads. Anyway, that's what purity culture is.
So Geraldine and Hugo have talked a bit about sex without actually mentioning it, and Alice has been a stumbling block. No, Alice has offered biscuits and it's been interpreted interestingly. And then we head back to the council where Geraldine is desperate to get some fines from people and trying to trick people into paying their Lent fines up, which was one of the moments, like you said earlier, Kate, I thought, I don't like this bit of Geraldine. I know it's probably intended for a bit of banter, but actually, deliberately trying to make people mess up isn't great, except when David does it and he brings out the chocolate bars for everyone. That's hilarious.
That is hilarious.
That's so interesting, because I see that completely the opposite way around. I thought what Geraldine did was hilarious, and when David brought out the chocolate bars, I thought, you absolute poo head. I was like, honestly, I wrote down in my notes, first of all, desperately want a Mars bar. Second of all, I can't believe that he would do that. And if I was the vicar, I think I feel so strongly attached to chocolate that I would have got up and been like, I can't believe you've done this, David. I'm going.
Can't believe you've done this.
Can't believe,
What I wrote was, everyone's being very good with their Lenten disciplines, better than Geraldine, and honestly, I'm with David on this, taunting Geraldine with chocolate. She deserves it for trying to extort her parishioners' weaknesses.
This is a definite split. I literally was like, I'm wounded. I noted down, wounded for Geraldine.
But, I mean, are you, because you've given up chocolate?
Maybe that has something to do with it.
Is that because you are seeing yourself in Geraldine very much,
highly likely
your temptation and struggle with chocolate?
Yeah, very possibly. But even so, I think we all have a duty of care to look after one another. And so when he brings them out, not just for himself, but also for everybody else apart from her, and leaves her out on purpose, I think that's really mean.
But that isn't David following his Lenten discipline to be nicer to people.
But if he was if he was truly being nice, he'd be like, Geraldine, you've given up chocolate, so I've brought this lovely apple for you. Or this donut.
Or I've brought everyone donuts instead of apples.
Donuts.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting though, isn't it?
Letter of the law rather than the spirit of the law, perhaps. But what we see is Jerry is increasingly, you can see that her Lenten discipline of giving up chocolate is very negatively affecting her. She is becoming a lot more pointed with people, and she's clearly struggling with having given up chocolate. And so my question is, should you engage in a Lenten discipline if it makes you mean and cruel to others? If it makes you grumpy and irritable, is that a worthwhile discipline? If we think about Christian values or faith values of being kind and generous and loving, does doing something which makes us the opposite of that, is that a good idea?
Well, I sort of think that actually you can give up whatever you like. It's actually how you manage your own behaviour around your discipline that matters. So for me, for example, I've given up chocolate, sweet food, puddings, everything that's nice. But I have a choice on whether I wake up in the morning and go, oh, I really wish I could have all the chocolate today, and I can't. That means I'm going to take it out on everyone. Or whether I go, yeah, and I do this, and Lord, it actually really hurts sometimes, and I'm weaker than I am. Would you please help me? Or I think, I'm actually going without for a reason. Like, I don't think Lent disciplines, if they do make us grumpy, then that's because we need to rethink about our behaviour, I think, rather than the discipline itself. And actually, if a discipline provokes a change in us or hurts or makes us go without or draws us closer to thinking, well, why am I bothering to do this? What is Lent all about? Then I think that's a good thing. I think it shows that it's working in a way. Who wants to do a Lent discipline where you don't feel the pain of it? Oh gosh, does that sound really terrifying?
No, it's reminding me of when I was pregnant. It's not a Lent thing, but similar in some ways. When I was pregnant, it turns out I had gestational diabetes, which is basically where you have diabetes just over the course of your pregnancy, so you need to be really careful about your sugar intake and things like that. And so I had to go more regularly to the hospital to go see a dietitian to work out what I was eating.
I remember those days.
I didn't think I had a particularly bad diet, but there were things like, you don't realise how much sugar is in tin tomatoes and that kind of thing. Yeah. And so I had to be really careful about what I ate. And Toby joined me in eating the same things as I ate.
Oh, that's so sweet.
He, I mean, still had beer, and but made that sacrifice of eating the same way that I was most of the time. As in most of the time, as in pretty much all of the time. But things like if I might have a bigger portion than I did, and that kind of thing. And that meant so much to me that they had sacrificed eating what they wanted to in a time in order to support and be with me in that. It's going back to doing Lent together, isn't it?
Yeah, and so I mean, I've been reflecting on Geraldine in this episode, and I've already talked about how I feel she's crueler in this episode, or at least more pointed or sharper than she usually is. And it feels to me like giving up chocolate has amplified something that was already wrong just before Lent. She was already showing that she was feeling irritable, and it looks like she was using chocolate as a coping method for whatever was happening to make her feel down. And it's a really common aspect, I think, of ministry, where you just have periods where everything gets to you. Things just come up at the same time, conversations are misinterpreted, there's some big struggle that's happening which no one else knows about, and you rely on coping methods. I think particularly when you're single and you don't have anyone to talk about things with, and you're alone at home at the end of the night throughout the day, and you're trying your best not to have out loud conversations with imaginary conversation partners who happen to be real people.
Just get a pet.
The imagined versions of people who you are in conflict with, and you start having conversations with them. And it doesn't,
in my head.
And it doesn't help because it's not the real version of them. But for me, at the start of this episode, it felt like that's where Geraldine was. That's why she's sharper with Alice at the beginning, because she's trying to focus on a task, and Alice is being her usual self, dithering about and saying wild and wacky stuff, while Geraldine is very clearly trying to get something done. She's working at something. And she has gone to the chocolate as her crutch, as something to make her feel better. And then that's taken away from her. And it just seems to be getting worse because she was already in a bad place. So there were better ways for her to handle that. There's a very popular meme on the internet about waking up and choosing violence. But Geraldine could wake up and choose kindness, although it's hard. But because of wherever she is in her life and ministry at this point in time, it's just not working.
For what you're saying about Geraldine and her, has got her crutch in one way, because I think there must be something going on in the background. Maybe she's just a bit fed up. Or Easter is a very busy time for vicars, and there's always lots going on with various different things. And don't you find it's always at this time when you're low on energy and things are happening that a big thing happens, and that's what happens next in this episode. It is really chucking it down where you are, Kate.
Dear listener, it is chucking it down outside and really hammering against my windows.
You've got Rain ASMR.
Rain ASMR. I literally have a playlist called Rain and Jazz, which is the sound of rain to soothing jazz. And I listen to it when I'm feeling especially anxious.
I might try that.
Well, the rain feels somewhat appropriate for what now happens in the episode, because they're at the vicarage and Alice is being Alice, and a phone call comes in and it's about Mrs. Cropley, and she's not well and has asked for the vicar. And Jerry heads over to the house and the whole parish council are there, and it becomes clear that Mrs. Cropley is dying. And it's a really tough one. And something that I liked, but I think I might be alone in this, is that when she appears, Geraldine doesn't realise quite how serious it is. She just thinks she's a bit poorly and wants to see the vicar.
Yeah.
And then Frank makes it clear, no, she's dying. And Geraldine says, oh, right, okay. She makes a joke about April Fools, which isn't appropriate. And then says, actually, I've never done this before. And then goes in to go see Mrs. Cropley on her deathbed.
Yeah.
And I liked her honesty in that, to the group of people that she knows of actually going, flip, right, okay, this is something I've trained for, but I've not actually done before, and now I've got to go do it. And it is, doing the deathbed stuff is hard.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I did like that bit as well. I thought that was done well. And it's a huge shift, because I think when she and Alice in the vicarage, she says, oh, this is Happy Valley, nobody dies here. And all the viewers are like, oh, phew, Mrs. Cropley will be fine. Alice is getting upset for no reason. Hooray, hooray, hooray. Then the next scene is like her in bed, clearly not well. And then obviously, she comes to, there's quite an interesting and important conversation. And this scene. And I have to say, I watched this episode probably about 1.5 years ago. I definitely was in the place that I'm in now, which I've been in for nearly 3 years, so it was here. And I watched this episode and I felt silly, but I cried because it brought back so many memories about being with people in their last moments. And it also kind of got me thinking about, when does a vicar truly get the time and space to grieve for their parishioners?
There was a really interesting podcast. It was Giles Fraser, Kate Botley and Richard Coles talking about funerals and death. And Kate gave this example of when her church warden, who's a significant kind of member of the congregation and significant support to the vicar, she was on her deathbed and was dying. And this church warden just sounded amazing, because she asked Kate, I know you're doing my funeral, but when's your chance to grieve for this? And so, Kate explained that she'll keep it together for the funeral, all be fine. And then when she gets home, she'll open a bottle of champagne, she'll cuddle her children, and that'll be her time to grieve.
Bless her.
On the funeral, she did it, she kept it together. And when she got home, there was a bottle of champagne waiting on her doorstep that this parishioner had arranged for her to have, and that was the point that she broke down and started to cry, because it is hard, isn't it, when you've built these relationships with people, and then often you're the person who then does the funeral, and yes, you're hurting and grieving for this person that's gone, but you kind of got to keep it professional to some degree.
Definitely.
And how do you manage that? Or do you keep it professional? Or I think you need to a point. And how you manage that is hard. But we're not quite at the funeral yet, because Jerry's at Letitia's bedside, doing the kind of last rites thing, which I think is a bit of a cliche scene in films and TV, isn't it, of going and doing the last rites. And I have personally never done last rites for anyone. My spouse Toby has, so I've heard kind of experience from him, But is that something that you two have done?
I've done something which almost the last rites, where I visited someone who was close to death, and we said some prayers, and I anointed them with oil of the sick. We didn't do last communion. I did a hospice placement where I had talked about that with a chaplain.
Wow.
I think, and it's the last rites are a very strange thing, because there's no guarantee that when you do it, it is actually the end. So I've known clergy who have gone and done the last rites, and one person's been fully recovered.
Oh really?
I've heard those as well.
And to clarify, so the last rites are not really what we see in the episode. The last rites tend to be a conversation about what's coming next, helping someone to feel ready and prepared. But then you have prayers, you have anointing, which is a special word for using oil to bless someone. There is a more in-depth explanation of that, but that is a nice broad explanation, a tidy explanation. And sometimes then you will also include a final communion, often a wafer which has already been dipped in wine, because usually by that point, and you just touch it to the lips, because then by that point people aren't able to consume anything.
It's confession part of it as well, because I think that's what people associate the most with last rites. It's a chance to say, here are the last of my sins, to make sure I can go into heaven.
Depending on tradition, I kind of said it quite broadly, you have a conversation about what's coming next, and so that can include anything which feels unresolved in life. It could include sins, will nearly always include an absolution, so an assurance that the person is forgiven. And that God loves them, which Geraldine does do. You can see she definitely tries to make sure she gets that in.
Letitia makes her confession, doesn't she? I haven't led a blameless life, Vicar.
Who has?
You can see Geraldine desperately trying to stick to a script. You know, she starts it off of, well, who has lived a blameless life, but then Letitia derails the conversation somewhat.
She wants to know about her cooking. Was she?
Yes.
And the way that she words it about being an experimenter and all that kind of thing, I'm like, hand on heart, I can say, yes, you have been a great experimenter in cooking. So I thought that's quite
good. We may not have always appreciated your experiments, but you were a great experimenter.
Yeah, exactly.
Although I've got to admit, this scene didn't hit me as emotionally as it seems to have hit for both of you. I think perhaps because I got so caught up in the tonal shift in terms of Geraldine, how she's treating other people, that it felt for me like this was just a sudden shift, a sudden topic change, and it felt so condensed that for me it didn't feel like it had been done justice. And I'll talk about this a bit later about what could be moved around to give Letitia a proper send off. It just felt almost tagged in for me.
I think she does a really good job though of doing the deathbed stuff most of the time. There's one thing she does that I think is a really bad idea. She promises something to Mrs. Cropley on her deathbed, which is a big no in my book. I think that's a really bad idea, because you never know what she doesn't know what she's promising, first of all. I think there's a better way to word it. Yes. Jenny, you're looking very pensive.
Am I? Oh, my face keeps giving me away. I completely agree with... It's like when someone says, can you keep a secret? You always say no. As in, like, you can tell me anything and I'll hold it in confidence. But obviously, if you're in harm or someone else is in harm, then, that's a really important part of what we do. I think I would really struggle to say, anything. I would really struggle if someone was on their deathbed and said to me, I need you to promise me you can do something. I'd probably say, well, tell me what it is first. But I'm just thinking if I was in that situation, I think I'd really struggle to say no. But I completely agree in practice, you're right. It doesn't, you can't. But thank goodness the burden wasn't too heavy, I suppose, in this case. It's quite a fun thing.
It's interesting because, at least in my experience, the people who I've encountered at that stage aren't really that conversational in the way that Letitia is. Often, I'm a particular instance I have in my mind where I have done the sort of last rites. Really, there's a lot of repetition and dwelling on, and this person was just asking for it to be over.
Oh gosh.
And that was the prayer. I want to be with God now.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really a conversation in that sense. It was assurances, and prayers and reading the Bible with that person.
Yeah.
I wonder if, particularly because that person was in a care home, so we were called by the care home staff saying, yeah, it's time.
Yeah.
And they tend not to call the vicar until they feel, that the person is exhibiting the kind of stages and behaviours of exiting the mortal coil.
Oh, what a phrase. The mortal coil.
Yeah, but what was really interesting about this scene that I really appreciated, so we transition into the Howard Goodall Psalm 23, which is the theme song for this show. Yeah. And Psalm 23 is actually one of the things you would read in the last rites with people. You read, it's called the Pastoral Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Yeah. It's a psalm of accompanying.
Yeah.
And it is the psalm that you tend to read on the deathbed, or when someone is sick, or at funerals.
Yeah, I use it quite a lot at funerals. But the other passage that I use is from John, chapter 14, I think. That is, in my Father's house there are many rooms, and talks about Jesus going to prepare a place. And yeah, what does that place look for? So the Psalm 23 is fabulous. And then we move on from hearing. Say that again.
Before we move on, so overall, for me, I feel like the last rites or ministry of prayers approaching death, I would describe it as a painful privilege.
Yeah.
It's something which is a privilege to do and to be trusted, to be able to have the authority to offer forgiveness and convince people and assure people and pray with people in my last moments. But it is painful to do.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And there are certain deaths that are harder to deal with than others, and you need to make sure that you have space to deal with that. So if it's you've been at the deathbed of someone and said that, you need to make sure you have a gap after to talk through things. If you've got particularly difficult funerals, it's always worth making sure you have a nice thing or some rest in the afternoon. Doing funerals for children is hard work.
Clear your diary for the week, I reckon. Well, definitely for the day, and then a slower paced week if you can. I think I learned that the hard way, and I didn't the first time, and I ended up cancelling things on the day because I thought, I'll be okay. But no, give yourself the space to think it through, process.
So it's when people ask, why do you like being a priest? I talk about things like this, that actually you're with people in the best moments of their life and the worst moments. And I do talk about it as a privilege to walk alongside people in the stuff that's really tough, and the stuff that's joyous and wonderful and worth celebrating, and then everything in between with that. And so after the psalm, we head to the vicarage, and
we don't see the funeral, do we? I wish we did. But,
I suspect because they don't want to make a mockery of it, and don't want to have the funny bits because the funny bits come later. And so we head to the vicarage and we're at the wake afterwards, and they're there having a drink for Letitia. And do you guys normally go to, if you've done a funeral, do you go to the wake or the kind of gathering that happens afterwards most of the time?
For me, yes, always. Unless I don't get an invitation or there isn't... When I'm meeting with the family before, I'll say, oh, is everyone invited? And they say, oh, yes. And quite often they'll say, oh, please come if you're able to. I'll go, oh, that's a real privilege. Yeah, I'd love to be there. And I think it is the place, honestly, where I can say that some of your best conversations and funeral ministry will happen at the wake. But for me personally, I have to say I do find it really hard, like when you walk into the room, because you always arrive later than everyone else because you've had to go and get changed or lock up the church or drive back from the cemetery or whatever it might be. Just sort of be like, hello everybody, hello. Because at first people look at you, they're like, oh, I thought your bit was over. And it's like, now the work begins. Not the work begins, but like it can feel a bit awkward at times. But yeah, I think it's really, really important to go.
I go if I've quite often, if you do the visit, people will say, oh, do come to the do afterwards, Vicar, and I'll say, if I'm free, yeah, I'd love to. I tend to go if they've invited me again after the funeral, because I think sometimes it can just be a bit of a, oh yeah, sure, better invite the vicar. But if you've had that particular connection with the family, or they say, yeah, do make sure you come along, then I do try and make the effort to go along afterwards, unless something else is booked in. But I do try and keep that space, because it is a really good time to talk to people about the person, especially if you've never met them before, and hear those stories, and it opens other people to talk about it. Although you do see people like, oh gosh, don't let the vicar sit at my table with me. I don't want to speak to the vicar. But Kate, do you go?
Yeah. I've got to be really honest. I think this is actually a really weak point in my funeral ministry. I've gotten into a really bad habit of not going unless I'm specifically invited. And often the invitation, if I get an invitation, will come as after the service is already finished and I've already got something else in my diary. And particularly during COVID, when I was not exactly isolating, but close to.
Yeah.
And I guess I've gotten out of the habit, and I had a really bad experience early on, I suppose, when I was training, when I was a curate, where I went along with my incumbent and just felt out of place and unnecessary. Yeah. And I'm working on it. I want to go to the wakes, the bun fights, but I'm really bad at inviting myself to things.
Yeah.
Or asking, do you want me to come along? Maybe I need to start at the visit saying, and would you like me to come to?
Yeah. It's a funny thing, isn't it, grief? We don't do it particularly well a lot of the time. But yeah, and it's this, Ian, is part of the reason why I enjoy going, because they're all there swapping stories and talking about Letty, slightly inappropriately at times, and cheers to Letty and all who sailed in her and all that kind of thing. But it is that place to share those memories and those joys and the happy times shared together. Yeah.
But they're honest about her.
Yeah.
Which I think, unfortunately, sometimes people, when you're preparing the eulogy for the service or the tribute, whatever you want to call it, people aren't always 100% honest.
He'd do anything for
about
anyone.
Who the person was.
That phrase.
Yeah,
every funeral.
yeah. Or they'll be honest, but they'll edit. They won't include things like, "Oh yeah, she was extremely promiscuous."
Yeah.
They wouldn't include that.
I did a funeral once where, at the meeting with the family, they were all like, "Yeah, he was a bit of a so-and-so." And so I'd prepared the service in a kind of way of going, right, okay, clearly there's things that people need a chance to grieve, but also to let go of any hatred and anger and that kind of thing they felt towards the person. But when I arrived there, a load of this person's mates turned up and were like, oh, he was the best bloke, he was amazing, you know, everyone loved him. And I'm like, oh crap, my sermon and the service does not shape that. So I had to quickly edit it to do a bit of both.
It's really tough, isn't it? You only know what you're told, and everyone there will have probably a slightly different, definitely a different experience of the person. And it's very hard writing something. I think this is one of the challenges as well of ministry, is writing something about and for somebody that you don't know. You, to be fair, you only have what you have been told. So, one of those things. But yeah,
it is why I often encourage someone who knew the person very well to do a tribute or eulogy, or at least write it for me to read. Maybe edit it, maybe I'll edit it. Although there is a particular privilege of talking to a family and gathering the information for a eulogy. I think it always hits home more if it's done by someone who knew the person, because people are more accepting of this is how this person knew them to be. This was who they were to the person giving them a eulogy. But when it's the vicar, you often get that sense of, well, you didn't really know them, why are you saying X, Y and Z? That's not right. I think it's a trade-off, but you shape the rest of the service, I think. I mean, as a vicar, you are shaping the whole service to speak to a particular moment of grief.
And I think it's hard as well, isn't it? Because often, especially if someone's had dementia or Alzheimer's or something like that, and the end of life has been a particular struggle, so much of the focus can be on that. And so you forget those other stories of, what were they like on holiday and that kind of thing. And you're completely right about shaping the service around them. And so talking to people, yes, getting someone else to write the eulogy, I think is really good, and because they'll word it and they know the stories. But the rest of it, I try and tie in, and especially with us doing this episode around Easter, with the message of Easter, of Jesus' death on Good Friday, but then his resurrection on Sunday, and the hope of eternal life, and that bit where you put your hand on the coffin. Well, this is what I do, and you send them to God and say, this person is now with God and is in God's care and is in God's keeping. I find such a wonderfully powerful moment, and just it's a joyful moment for me in a weird way, of just imagining that person just now in front of God, and God knowing that person completely and having them in their care. And when the funeral happened for my godmother a few years ago, which was a really difficult funeral to do, I think it was the first hymn, and I can't remember exactly what the first hymn was, but it was quite a joyful one. And I suddenly just had a picture of my auntie Lisa in heaven with her Lord, joyously dancing and celebrating and worshipping. And in the midst of a very tear-soaked funeral for lots of us, that was a moment of just going, I can just see her there in that place. And that Easter message of hope and resurrection and being with God was very prevalent. That's a right side note from Vicar of Dibley, but
yes, I have had a similar experience with my granddad, my dad's dad. He was a vicar and he died just before I was ordained, just a few months before. And it was a really sad moment for me because I was really looking forward to celebrating that with him. But when he passed away, we had this kind of story my dad was telling, and kind of sharing it around the funeral. I can't remember if it was actually in the funeral, but it really shaped how I felt about the funeral. And my dad said when my granddad passed, his suitcase was already packed, almost like he had prepared himself, and he was like, right, I'm ready to go now. I'm all prepared. I'm ready to be with God now. And so for me, although it was sad, I mean, I really struggled to read. It was Revelations, a reading I was given. I saw a new heaven and a new earth. And it was emotional, but I knew that my granddad was where he wanted to be. He'd already gone. He'd prepared himself. and gone on his way.
It's beautiful. And
that's a beauty of what funerals can be. And they can be really painful and traumatic for a lot of people, but they can also be such an entrusting, I like the word entrusting for funerals. We're entrusting someone to God, we're entrusting them to, if they were a person of faith, what they believed was going to happen, and entrusting them to what we believe as a God of love and forgiveness and joy and compassion and all of that.
I guess that is kind of what makes this episode surprising in some ways, because you might think that the Easter episode of the Vicar of Dibley would be a chance to glimpse that, and you think, well, how are they going to get round preaching for an entire episode, because the message of Easter is so powerful and so amazing. But actually it is very bunny focused, isn't it? And it's kept light-hearted, and it still has the undertones of obviously death and maybe a little bit of what is to come, but not really. The focus is more, secular, isn't it, with the Easter bunny and the eggs and...
You do have Geraldine say very explicitly in this wake, the true Easter message is that Jesus gives us hope of eternal life in heaven. And the spirit of liturgy in this village. Yeah. So they do get that in there. We could gripe and nitpick exactly about what the true Easter message is, what Jesus' resurrection means, but that's such a wonderful little summary, just put in there without it being too... We've got to remember that this is a comedy for all people, not just for church people. So... if they'd gone too hard on death and resurrection, it would have really turned people off.
Yeah, that would have been really tricky.
So they had to include the Easter Bunny. They had to include lighter-hearted comedy around the very real experience of death and hope and eternal life.
Yeah.
It's cleverly done.
So we've had the wake at the vicarage, and then the next day we're back with Geraldine, who says she should be writing her Easter sermon, but she's not. Are we all preaching on Easter Sunday?
Indeed.
Yes.
Have we all written our sermons?
Absolutely not.
Great, okay, we're in the same place as Geraldine, and instead of writing a sermon, she's trying to make herself some bunny ears and a bunny bottom, and has a lot of chocolate eggs about. To which Alice comes in and spots her.
First, we've got David coming in. We think Geraldine's hoarding these Easter eggs, and she's looking at them. I think at the start of that scene, she's looking at the Easter eggs, and you think, oh, is she about to give in? Has she been hoarding this chocolate? And then David comes in, she hides them from him, and you think, oh, she's trying to hide that she's been breaking her Lenten discipline, and he really doesn't want David to know. And they have their little exchange about Hugo potentially being gay, but no, reveal, it's okay, David. He's just having lots of lustful thoughts.
Not that it would be an issue if Hugo was
Not
gay.
that it would be an issue, and it's nice that Geraldine does say that. I think that's important.
Yeah.
But then David goes away, Alice comes in, tries to confiscate the chocolate, and we have the reveal that actually Mrs. Cropley's deathbed request to Geraldine was to be the Easter Bunny for Dibley.
Yeah.
But she catches herself because she's watching Alice's face.
Yeah.
And she says instead
that the Easter Bunny phoned Mrs. Cropley because he's busy with child services, I think it is, because he's a rabbit, and so that's something that he would need to deal with, and needed someone else to take over the mantle for this one. And so Geraldine gets away with not breaking Alice's heart, and we then see her dressed up in her bunny costume, ready to go and deliver eggs. And I don't know if this has been the case for you guys, but I've found dressing up has been an important part of my ministry over time, and I have had many fancy dress outfits that I've worn for various church bits. I'm dressed up as a chicken, as a detective mouse, various different things. So this is not totally uncommon, dressing up as ridiculous things. Maybe it's just me, because both of you are looking quite blank at me.
I was a monkey, literally, last week for a party. So, yeah, no, you're right. I'm with you.
I wouldn't say it's a core feature of my ministry. I think, for me, I'm more tied up on that she's doing this on Easter morning, where... I mean, I have a 5:30 service on Easter morning.
Do you? Oh,
service. Nice. Unfortunately, I opted into it. So, I mean, I personally wouldn't want to get up to do that on Easter morning, but good on Jerry. And as she's delivering the eggs, we have the big reveal, really, to close the episode, which is Mrs. Cropley as the troll that she was, and I'm convinced she was always fully aware of everything she was doing. I think so as well. And every moment of her deathbed confession was calculated to make Geraldine squirm. That she has asked every single person who visited her to become
the Easter Bunny,
the Dibley Easter.
And they do hint at that, don't they? Jerry later says, "Yeah, I think she's having a laugh up there." Because the assumption is that she's forgotten that she's told everyone. So we bump into David in a bunny outfit and all this kind of thing. And then, what's his name? Owen has got his inappropriate outfit that is an actual rabbit ear and all this kind of thing, which is just a bit grim. And yeah, I think Letitia always knew that she'd asked all these different people and was having a chuckle in heaven at this meeting of bunnies happening on Easter morning.
And it is actually a fantastic memory for Letitia, a way of marking her joy that we saw in her character in all the episodes leading up to this.
So, and there's that really lovely moment, isn't it, as the episode ends, where they're all dressed up as bunnies and having a chat and a laugh about it all. And yeah, I hope they wore them for their Easter Sunday service. She just kept it on.
Cheers to Letitia.
Yeah.
Cheers to Letitia. God bless that woman. So the episode finishes, of course, with the classic joke, which I completely understood because I love American football. But Jenny,
do you know what? You guys said to me, did you get the joke? And I said no. And I've just realised why. Because I turned off the episode before we got to the joke. I feel like I need to go into the confessional immediately. I was watching it in a bit of a rush, so I was well prepared for our podcast. And I've just realised...
Are you ready for the joke then?
No, I didn't even watch it. Didn't even see the joke.
Well, let me tell you it.
Oh, okay. Who's there?
OJ.
OJ who?
Okay, you can be on the jury.
Oh, okay, yeah. Because you had to not know him, didn't you, to go on?
Yeah.
But it does date the episode, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It does, and Alice doesn't get it all because she doesn't know who OJ is. But then it's dated even more by Geraldine saying... It's dated even more by Geraldine saying, oh, well, someone more famous like John Major. Who was the Prime Minister in the UK at the time.
And OJ was OJ Simpson, who was a famous American football player who did something very bad. Allegedly did something very bad and got away with it.
I'd like to finish. So I've griped a little bit during this episode. I felt like the tone wasn't quite handled right. I felt that the episode wasn't structured well to really give Letitia the best send-off, to give that kind of best emotional punch. I would open in a similar way with that conversation about the Easter Bunny. And actually, I wouldn't change much about how Geraldine is acting, except I would shine a light on her being frustrated and struggling with how she's treating people. And, you know, she's not being as kind as she is normally. I would shine a light on that. So that's an actual part intended of the episode, a theme to deal with.
As in, Geraldine acknowledges it or Alice acknowledges it?
Geraldine acknowledges it, or someone else makes a comment. I'd make it an actual
theme in the episode.
Okay.
Then, in the next few scenes, like so at the council, I wouldn't change much. I'd still have them giving things up, but I would give Mrs. Cropley, I'd give Letitia a little bit more prominence, either as a target or trying to bring her light-hearted jokes and the way she deals with things and the way she diffuses conflict, make that a bit more prominent. Okay. I'd give her a bit more of a spotlight so that when she's lost, we really feel it more. Then we'd still have scenes where Jerry is hiding chocolate, but we'd actually make it more explicit that she is hoarding chocolate for after Easter to gorge herself after Easter. Less about her struggling with chocolate, but we'd still have that because she's not having chocolate. She's lost her coping mechanism, but now she's really hanging on to, I'll get through this, and at the end, I'm going to eat all of you precious chocolates, right? And there will be more interactions with other people where it's comedy, she's hiding the chocolate in strange and weird places, she's throwing it over her shoulder for it to land hidden in a bookcase or whatever, setting up some fantastic chocolate hiding skills. Then Mrs. Cropley passes away. It's a shock to the system, and you can see Geraldine really struggling with maybe how dismissive she's been of Mrs. Cropley leading up to this, of Letitia leading up to this, and realising, really, really hitting home that she has lost sight of this important aspect of loving people in ministry and particularly appreciating Letitia. So Mrs. Cropley entrusts her with being the Easter Bunny. And Geraldine takes this really seriously as a way to honour and respect this woman who she really loved. And so then she takes all the chocolate that she has hoarded and uses all those hiding skills to distribute the chocolate around the village as a blessing to everyone. And that's how I would rewrite the episode.
Interesting. It's got very Jesus and Peter undertones to me. Do you love me? Feed my lambs. Do you know what I mean? Very interesting.
Yeah.
With chocolate, yeah.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Vicars Watch Dibley. Thank you to Toby for editing our ramblings.
Any views expressed in this podcast are our own and don't necessarily represent those of the Church of England or any other organisations with which we are affiliated.
And as always, bless you for listening.
Did you know they just discovered that the Easter Bunny is actually an alien?
What?
Yeah, he's an extraterrestrial.
Oh, very nice. That would explain a lot.
Do you know what? That's the first joke you've told that we've actually got as well. Yay!